Video games rarely show us thriving civilizations. Instead, they tend to drop us into the aftermaths of things. They show us fallen kingdoms, abandoned cities, destroyed governments. We don't arrive at the beginning of the history. We arrive at the ending of it, and we're left to wonder what actually happened. So the question becomes, why are video games so obsessed with ruins? I think one of the preeminent reasons for this is because video games and the setting, the world building, that allows developers to tell stories without exposition. You don't actually have to sit there and read it. You don't have to sit there and go throughout the entire game. Obviously, you will at some point, but you don't have to do that because the setting in and of itself will tell you and give you some sort of indication as to what happened, and it will raise inquisition and questioning. You look at a game like The Last of Us, you see the vines growing into the buildings, you see the wildlife, the flora and fauna. They have inhabited the places that humans and the people there used to inhabit, and it makes you wonder what happened. And then eventually, as the story goes on, you learn about the cordyceps virus. You learn about how Ellie is the one who can potentially save humanity. You learn about all these other things after the fact, but just the world building in and of itself is a powerful tool that they use to create and tell stories. The reason why I think this is so powerful is because there's an absence of explanation. And when you don't explain things, you kind of just leave the gamer to their own devices to kind of figure out what happened. And that's a powerful tool that they use. This is especially apparent in other games like Elden Ring, like when you get to Lindale, the royal capital, when you see the various churches, the Church of the Rod, Church of Ella, and Limgrave. You see all these things, all these collapsed structures. You see the ruins, Waypoint ruins, whatever, etc. You see all this stuff, and they're remnants, they're shadows of their former self. And in seeing that, you don't even have to interact with the lore markers or read the journals or read the item descriptions, because the setting in and of itself in these ruins will tell you that something happened here. Something of importance probably happened here. And as you play the game, you will begin to realize that you have been dumped in a setting where the main triggering event has already transpired. And what you are experiencing now is the aftermath, because Elden Ring takes place after the shattering already occurred, after the death of Godwin. That's what happens. So to dump you into all that and for you to just figure out and just navigate this new world, that's something that I think is more potent, as opposed to you just being at the onset of something and then playing through it. I rather would go to the aftermath, and then you're left answering questions and you get to piece together things and come to your own conclusions. And to substantiate what I'm telling you guys, I stumbled across this Reddit post here that speaks about the effectiveness of world building and how that in and of itself can add more onto the story, as opposed to you just simply going throughout it or reading a synopsis of it. This one paragraph here in particular reads as follows: intimacy also extends to the act of looting, making you feel like you're invading the long-gone owner's privacy. Children's pictures pinned to fridges, suitcases laid out ready to leave, notes left by loved ones searching for one another in the chaos. So many stories can be uncovered through documents and, more subtly, the traces of the individuals who lived and died within them. The personal journeys of the protagonists are complemented by the silent anecdotes of each environment you are free to explore, enabling video games to use environmental storytelling as a narrative device for exposition. I think another reason this works so well is because humans are naturally curious, and I think all developers do is they just find a way to use that curiosity against us in a good way, of course, because when we play a game, I think we start off as more of a exploratory, exploration-based role and angle that can change and morph into more of an investigative role. Now we want to know things of what happened. What started out as exploration can end as archaeology. You want to know, how did this person die? What happened to this corpse? What about these rocks? What about these plants? Why is this here? Why is this flora and fauna taking over this particular building in this setting? What happened? And I think this is why ruins feel more engaging than that of pristine, clean spaces, because they beg to be understood. You want to ask questions and you want to know what happened. Whereas with pristine spaces, places that are already clean or well kept, or there's a bunch of gold or there's a bunch of luxury, that's boring. No one really wants to know how this came to be. I mean, it'd be nice to know. It wouldn't be a disservice to know what happened, but I would argue that the contrary is far more interesting. I think there's a different emotional weight when you realize the world isn't trying to impress you, it's trying to remember itself, what it used to be. I remember the first time I felt something like this, where I didn't have like fear or excitement or angst, but there was just reflection. There was just a degree of introspection. And it wasn't even my own introspection. It was introspection towards what I was actively perceiving and looking at. I remember when I played God of War 2018 for the very first time, and it's the part where Kratos, Mimir, and Atreus, they're going to get a piece of the slab so they can open the sacred gateway so they can go to Jotunheim. And then they see the giant, frost giant, his deceased body laying over the entire landscape. And immediately I begin to wonder, well, how did he die? What happened? And then it's only as you keep playing that you realize Thor killed him. You see the giant chisel going through his head and it's protruding throughout the opposite end, where you eventually get to the bottom and you have that boss fight down there. And just look at how that corpse in that setting, the world building that Sony Santa Monica did, that in and of itself told the story. I didn't even have to progress further because I already started asking questions based on what I saw and based on the ruins, the aftermath of what had happened. I also think game developers utilize ruins because they're kind of like a commentary, an indirect commentary on power and structure and the status quo of the world that we live in today. So you'll see a ruin, and that could be representative of a failed government or failed gods or fallen empires. It can all be symbolic for those things. And I think games repeatedly show us this to emphasize the point that these machinations are temporary. They're impermanent. And in that impermanence lies something far more powerful and far more depthful. And this phenomenon is especially common in games that utilize mythology or mythological figures in fantasy. You look at a game like God of War 3, Zeus, the father of the heavens, his own son kills him, kills his brother, kills his other brother, kills his wife/sister. He kills everybody. It shows that nothing will last forever. And I think that's why these ruins are so powerful, because you even see that indicative of a game like God of War, where things are golden and they're nice and they're pristine, but it can all come crumbling down in a matter of moments. Whether it's years or whether it's just a few hours, it can happen, and nothing is permanent or lasts forever. And I think that's what these ruins are symbolic of. And as I said before, ruins are an indirect way to address certain things. And I think they are used so heavily because it's a way to have a confrontation towards a social issue or some sort of problem without directly addressing it, if that makes sense. So if I want to talk about what's going on in the world, let's use like this ICE stuff. Let's use political things like tensions with the United States, Iran. If I want to address these things, I'm not just going to plainly put that in a video game. If I'm a developer, I'm not just going to do that, because that will hurt my bottom line and my money. What I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize ruins. I'm going to utilize certain parties and factions, give them different names, give them different characteristics, and then I can address something indirectly without even having to hint to it at all. And just to clarify, I don't think there's anything wrong with them doing that. I think they're very intelligent for navigating these issues in such a way. It's also very hard to examine failure when it hasn't occurred yet. When you take a test, you can't really examine your failure because you're actively taking the test. You haven't finished it or completed it yet. So you haven't received that feedback. You haven't received the questions that you got wrong. You haven't received the rationales. You don't know. With the ruin, it's already happened. It's the aftermath. You can look at the rubble. You can look at the dead bodies. You can look at the people left in its wake. You can examine that. You can analyze that. It's very hard to do that when failure has not occurred, which is probably why it's so compelling to use these type of structures in a game as well. Ruins aren't just something interesting to look at or something that just solely raises questions. They're not just aesthetic. They're philosophical. They send messages. They're representative of themes, of symbolism, of things that used to be. These ruins in these settings, they ask gamers to reflect on ideas and concepts such as decay, legacy, impermanence. And more importantly, it can alter their perception of these ideals. Games just don't show us broken worlds. They ask if we're living in one. I'm Harlem. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.